Welcome to Blueprint of an Athlete, where science meets sports. I'm Dr. Robin West, a board-certified orthopedic and sports medicine surgeon, and your host as we explore the intersection of performance, recovery, injury prevention, and innovation. I'm thrilled to welcome Dr. Daniel Laby, who's a sports vision ophthalmologist whose work has transformed how athletes see and perform. For more than 30 years, he's helped competitors in Major League Baseball, the NBA, NHL, and Olympic sports refine one of their most powerful tools, the vision system. Dr. Laby has served as Director of Sports and Performance Vision at SUNY College of Optometry and as an assistant clinical professor at Harvard Medical School, bridging science and on-field application. He's a co-creator of the Sports Vision Pyramid, now used by teams worldwide to assess and train visual performance. He's also the author of a highly acclaimed book, The Eye of the Champion, which was published last year. Welcome, Dr. Laby.
Thank you. Looking forward to this.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Let's start off with a really simple question. Can you explain the difference between an ophthalmologist and optometrist to our audience? I often get asked that question.
Yeah, that's a common question. Both are doctors of vision care, if you will, but the approach is maybe somewhat different, and the background is certainly different. Both optometrists and ophthalmologists go to undergraduate bachelor degree programs, but that's where the difference starts to show up. As an ophthalmologist, a medical doctor, we go to medical school. We have 4 years of medical school. Often in terms of vision work, we have 3 years of ophthalmology residency, which includes both taking care of patients, medications, surgery, and so forth. And then there's often a fellowship. In my case, it was a fellowship after that for another year on top. Optometrists go directly from undergraduate school to optometry school. That program varies in length and how much they do what they call a residency or not, how many years of training, but they're limited in terms of what they can do in terms of care for patients. Where an ophthalmologist is a regular medical doctor, we are licensed actually in medicine, not in ophthalmology. I I did thousands of vaccines during the COVID time as a volunteer for New York City. Nothing to do with vision, sports, or anything. Just a matter of injecting people in the arms, and so forth. As a medical doctor, that was routine. I've been called on airplanes to take care of people that don't feel well on airplanes, and had to decide whether we're going to cross the Atlantic or not, and land and disrupt 300 people's lives, or fly across and hopefully the sick person is going to make it. And I'm sure you've had that experience. So that's a medical doctor. Optometrists aren't going to have that basic medical background, aren't going to have the understanding of surgery for sure, but even how the whole body works together, not just looking at the eyes. So optometrists are more focused on the eyes. Now, in terms of sports vision, it's interesting because as you may mention, the majority of sports vision specialists are optometrists, not ophthalmologists. And that kind of comes from the idea of vision training, which has been a very, very common thing that's happened over the years. Unfortunately, as an ophthalmologist, a medical doctor, we look at things critically, scientifically. We want to see evidence-based, values to make sure our decisions and what we do is based on fact, if you will, as opposed to maybe just a few number of case studies, feelings, or experience. And that's where things differ a little bit. And so, if you look at care of patients, if I had to get new glasses, a new prescription, I'd probably go to optometrist. In fact, that's what I do, because ophthalmologists don't really concentrate on that. And over the years, ophthalmologists have been moving more towards surgical interventions, where optometrists have been moving towards interventions of improving vision through other means, non-surgical, which may be glasses, maybe prisms, and even cognitive processing of visual information, which has a significant impact on how one sees, if you will, not vision, but how one sees. And that's a very interesting distinction to make. But I think in sports vision, we kind of move towards that area of understanding how the whole visual system works together. So there's very significant differences in training, but in sports vision, there's a lot of similarities and parallels.
So interesting. How did you first get involved in sports vision? What kind of drew you to that field? And since it is not that common in ophthalmology,
No,
especially when you train, probably, right?
yeah, I would say, totally by accident is the answer. And as in most cases in life, it's important, I think, to take chances, opportunities. There's no way you can advance if you don't try to fail. And as long as you're willing to not succeed and know when to change, and I talk about it in my book a little bit of the sunken cost fallacy, where people, spend a lot of time, they don't want to change what they're doing because they put a lot of investment in what they're doing. A quote misattributed to Einstein is important. It's often called an Einstein quote, but the definition of insanity is trying to do the same thing over and over again and think that there's something different is going to happen. And that's the sunken cost fallacy, kind of a nutshell. And so if you try in life to go down one path and it's not working, be ready to change to something else. And that's kind of what I did. I got to UCLA for my fellowship in pediatric ophthalmology and strabismus. And the head of the department said, "You have to do a project. I want you to pick up this project that the other guy started and finish it." And I was like, "I want to do my own project." I was like, "Well, you wanted me to do that." And, the chairman of the department, you can't really say no too much. So we negotiated a little bit, and the negotiation was, I'll be the first author on the paper that comes out of this. And he agreed, and so we did that, and that was working with the Dodgers in Los Angeles. Dodgers then weren't as good as Dodgers now, but it was a different club. It was a project that was interesting, and I said, "Oh, this is kind of interesting," and it was an opportunity that I hadn't thought about. And that led to the year after my fellowship, they flew me into spring training. And the year after that, they flew me in. And that took 18 years of flying me into spring training and working with the club. They moved from Florida to Arizona, working with the club. And other clubs heard about it and said, "I don't do that too." And that led to my career in sports vision by accident.
By accident. It's fascinating. I first became interested in it when I joined the NFL almost 25 years ago, and just seeing some of the vision training. Again, it was in its infancy 25 years ago. It's so much has changed, and then I had an opportunity to work with the elite military about 15 years ago, and I went to their training facility and I spent the day with them, and I realized how much energy they put into training their vision system. And they had me do all these games with them, and these computer games where these balls were flying around, numbers and colors, and I failed. I failed it horribly, but it was just amazing to see how good they were, how quick, how accurate, and how they use it for injury prevention, injury recovery, concussion recovery, as well as that performance side.
Yeah, without a doubt. I focus on the performance side. I don't focus at all on the injury side. A lot of optometrists do focus on concussions and so forth. But to me, what fascinates me is the absolute potential of the visual system and the brain to perform. And, unfortunately, I think a lot of people don't leverage their abilities to the maximum. But when we work with athletes, especially elite athletes, as you mentioned, or elite military personnel, we're working with people that have leveraged and have the ability to leverage their visual system, their brains to incredible levels. Being able to push them further is what's interesting to me, and understanding how they work and what's important and what's not important is what's interesting. And so it's been a career of discovery, I'll say. I came in 30 years ago, as you mentioned, 25, but even 30 plus years ago in my case, things were very, very different in terms of equipment, in terms of how we did things, what we knew, and so forth. The field has immensely grown. Technology has developed incredibly well. Obviously, when I started, my cell phone was a big brick, and now my cell phone's a small little folding thing. Incredible technology advances, which have also led to incredible advances in training and technique. One of the things that I worry about is training for training's sake, as opposed to training in the directed manner. And another difference between, I think, optometry and ophthalmology is if people came to your practice and you gave everybody that came to you with the same treatment, regardless of what their complaint was or what their problem was, I would think you probably wouldn't have many patients left over a short period of time, because some of them will be helped, obviously, but most of them you're giving their own treatment for. And likewise, you wouldn't do surgery on every joint of their body as an orthopedic surgeon, just automatically, regardless of a knee problem or another problem. That doesn't make sense. Well, in vision training, unfortunately, a lot of times, especially in the past, people would just kind of throw a lot of stuff on the wall and hope something sticks, and people would be spending time on things that they really didn't need, either for their sport, because sports have different needs, or the person had abilities that were good enough they didn't need training in that area. They needed training in other areas. And the way I try to look at it is more, I want to know how you do. I want to make sure you can do what you have to do. If there's a weakness in one area, we're going to help you on that area. But I'm not going to sit and make you train everything, because it may not be relevant to what you need to do to perform. And your time could be better spent training somewhere else, another area of your sport that can benefit you and the club more. And that's, I think, a big difference between how I approach athletes, sports vision, than some other people.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, there are so many things that people are working on training, right? From strengthening to nutrition to sports psychology, and so you can see that you get inundated with all this stuff. So you've worked with athletes in baseball, hockey, soccer, Olympic sports. So how do the visual demands differ across all these sports?
Yeah, well, first I tell people, when I get the first question, is sports vision important? I tell them, you tell me a sport that people play with their eyes closed, and I'll stop what I'm doing. I'll retire, because I can't think of any sport that Anybody plays with their eyes closed, whether it's, an e-sport, whether it's, chess, which I'll call that a sport, or, more classic sports like NFL or NBA or so forth. And so vision plays a role. There's no question. So that's number one. Now the question is, what are the demands in the sport? How they differ is your question, and that's important as well because I think about sports as being small target, fast moving sports. We're talking about tennis, baseball, hockey. Thinking about larger target, shorter distances, slower moving sports where other things are important. Here I'm thinking about basketball, for example, football or soccer, or NFL football in that category. And then you have other sports where, it's close contact, like boxing or fencing and so forth, and just to name a few. So you can kind of break sports into a couple big categories. And those categories are important. For example, in baseball, peripheral vision is not very important. But in basketball or soccer, it's critically important. And so I'm not going to really look too much at a MLB player's peripheral vision because it's not something that's going to help them. In fact, I got to this point because we started testing the Dodgers with a series of tests, about 30 different tests, vision tests. The players went through this. We did this for several years. In fact, the first paper that we published, the first paper published in the ophthalmic literature in sports vision was in the American Journal of Ophthalmology, our paper about the visual performance of Major League Baseball players. And what we found when we did that work was that, for example, color vision deficits in the baseball players were about 7-8% of the players. Well, if you look at normal population males, it's about 7 or 8% anyway. And so there was no difference in the color vision between the normal population and baseball players, which tells us that that's not a selected skill. On the other hand, if you look at visual acuity, sharpness of vision, 20/20 is the average in the general population, what people, know about. And the average vision in baseball was 20/12. Well, now we have something that's showing in this group of elite athletes is different than general population. So there may be some importance in that in performance. And in fact, there is. Where in color vision is the same, it's not important to be able to detect reds from greens, for example. And if you think about it, I don't know, red versus green distinction is probably not something you can think about in baseball as being relevant. And so you want to understand the sport in general, and then the sport specifically where colors will or will not, in this case, make a difference in baseball. In fact, colors in other sports will make a difference. In soccer, NFL football, color could make a difference, but not in MLB baseball. And so it's important to think about the task in general, which differs between sports. And for example, we published a paper after our work with the Olympics in Beijing of different sports. And you can see there clearly, like depth perception, for example. In archers, depth perception was not that critical. In boxers and fencers, it was very important, if you think about it. The target in archery is flat and is far away, and there's no depth question. It's a question of accuracy, of acuity. In a boxer, if they can't tell a right hook how far it is from their head, they're in deep trouble. They don't have to see it clearly. They just have to be able to see it good enough to know that there's a hook coming and how far away it is. And so each sport's very different. And it's important to understand those differences in order to ideally, efficiently work with the athletes.
Yeah. So is there one visual skill that consistently separates these elite athletes, whether it's a hitter tracking a 95-mile-an-hour fastball or a goalkeeper reading a penalty shot, that separates the best from the rest?
It really depends on the sport, right? So we developed this idea of the sports vision pyramid over the years, understanding that taking the idea of you can't play with your eyes closed to the basic thing is being able to see. And so the bottom of that pyramid is vision, sharpness of vision. And then it builds the use of both eyes together in terms of depth perception. It builds into decision making, into making a motor action, perfectly guided by what you're seeing at the right time in the right place and so forth. And that builds on each other. But the importance of each level, for example, varies on the sport. Like I mentioned, the boxers didn't have, they had average vision, the boxers, but the baseball players had far better than average vision because their task in hitting a baseball requires you to pick up the ball at 60, 55 feet away. You have about 100 milliseconds, a tenth of a second to view it, where you have to then make a decision, begin a motor action, and do all that within a quarter of a second when a blink takes a third of a second. So it's just shorter than the blink of an eye. You have to be able to start your swing if you're going to be successful. Whereas in boxing, it's a much different time constraint, a different visual constraint. So people ask me which sport has the best vision. I don't know, because it varies between sport. What needs.
Yeah. So do those baseball players self-select out? Are they getting better vision as they, when they start early at a young age? Are they just naturally born that way and that's why they choose baseball? What's your thought around that?
There's definitely a selection process because if you don't have the vision and you don't have the cognitive visual abilities, you're not going to perform well and you're not going to progress. And if you don't progress, you're not going to get training, and if you're not get training, and then it becomes a vicious cycle, and you're not gonna make it. Now you need talent, of course. You need other skills, but in terms of vision, if you don't have it in the beginning, you're just not gonna progress. You remember Malcolm Gladwell's, I forget which one of his books, but talks about the hockey players. The month that you're born in is gonna be a critical determinant of whether you're gonna get the proper coaching to advance. So there's so many different factors that come into play. I played Little League baseball. I started as a pitcher. Eventually, my pitching wasn't good enough, so I ended up in the outfield, and I was good there. Number one, because I had a fairly decent arm, so I could throw the ball far because I was a pitcher. But as the years went on, I was not a very fast runner. I was probably a little overweight. I wasn't that great a batter, and I didn't advance. And my baseball career ended, in grade school, I'm going to say probably. I did make it to the varsity golf team in high school, so golf was very different. But I will tell you, the only reason I did is because they needed to have 6 people on the team, I think, and they only had 5, and everybody had to do something, and that was where I ended up. It wasn't because necessarily my golf skill, but I went I went to sports and sports vision because of my skill in the scientific analytic, ocular area, the vision area. And so people, I think, find their strengths and go into their areas of strength and what they enjoy and what they're good at. But there definitely is a selection process.
And sports vision is really big in golf as well. I mean, it's always interesting when you see these golfers, these elite golfers, or even at my golf club. I'm like, wait, how are they such a good athlete? And there's obviously something behind it, and sports vision plays a key in that as well.
So what's the most important thing in golf in terms of sports vision that you can do? Not the answer. This is actually going to be for the people listening. This is if they play golf, this is going to take strokes off your game, and you could actually maybe make some money on this if you play your opponents properly, because they won't know that you know this trick here. It's something called the quiet eye. And in short, if let's say you're putting and you have the ball in front of you and you're dressing the ball and you have the putters coming back and the putter hits the ball and the ball goes towards the hole. Most people, once it's made contact, will look to see how they did if the ball ended up in the hole. And that's a no-no. That's going to decrease your chance of putting effectively. What you want to do is keep your eye looking at the point of anticipated contact of the putter as the putter's coming towards the back of the ball where the putter is going to contact. Keep your eye on that point before the putter hits it, obviously when the putter hits it, and keep your eye on that point even after the ball has left for about a second, we'll say, after the ball has left. That will significantly improve your chances of sinking the putt and taking strokes off your game. That's true also of drives, of iron shots, wherever you are on the tee, on the green, it doesn't really matter. Look before, during, and after the club hits the ball to that same point of contact, and you'll be much more accurate.
Yeah, that quiet eye makes sense. I think, is it just because when you look away, maybe you swing differently, or is it something at that moment of impact? Because clearly, if you watch the ball or you don't watch the ball, it's going to not change. But maybe that moment of impact, you're pulling up or pulling away. Is that what do you
Yeah,
think it is?
pulling up and away would be the physical manifestation, but before that, there's a visual manifestation. Because if you think about to make an eye movement, in other words, if you're the moment the ball hits the putter or the putter hits the ball, you're going to move your eyes. Your brain started thinking about moving your eyes about 300 mils, 250, 300 milliseconds before the eyes actually moved. And I'm going to give you a parallel. Most people probably have experienced the fact when they're cutting something, a cucumber thinly with a knife, and they're going chop, 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 chop. As long as they're looking at it and they're concentrating on it, they're doing a good job. Their fingers are not bloody. The cucumber is cut well and so forth. If someone calls your name, or if the doorbell rings, or if you get distracted for a moment, you're very likely to cut yourself, or at least cut the cucumber not the way you want it to. And that's because your concentration has changed. And even though the motor movement, began and it's a very repetitive movement, that little change in concentration changed where you went. Well, the same thing happens when you're 300 milliseconds before the putter actually hits the ball. Your brain now is thinking about moving your eyes. It's putting together that sequence of actions through the, the nuclei in the brainstem, through the cranial nerves, moving to the muscles of the eye. They're going to move that eye, those two eyeballs in sync, exactly in sync, to the new target. You're thinking about doing all that while you should be 100% thinking about putting the putter on the right place at the ball at the right time. And that distraction will eventually lead to a motor movement of moving your head away or your body. But what's going to be critical is what your eyes are doing. And if your brain is not working 100% on that task and is thinking about moving your eyes are going to start moving, your brain's going to be disconnected from the actual task, and it's going to decrease success. That's been shown in studies, been published quite a bit.
Yeah, my husband played basketball in college, and he always talked about shooting free throws, from and watching the rim of the basket, right, and not watching the ball. Is that sort of the same idea, that quiet eye?
I'm pretty sure I'm the ophthalmologist who's published the most papers in sports vision. For one point, I was the most published in sports vision person. I'm not sure if that's still true or not. That was about 4 or 5 years ago. But one of my papers was with an NBA team I took care of, where we actually put on these glasses to track what the athlete was looking at during a free throw. And I had the entire club shoot 30 free throws each. And I used these glasses to see what they were looking at when they were shooting this 30 free throws. And then I looked at the a heat map, if you will, of what they were looking at versus how many of those free throws were successful. And if you look at the guys who got, 29, 30 out of 30 free throws, they were, as you say, tightly focused or tightly aimed at the rim of the basket. If you look at the guys who got 15, 16, 18 free throws, they're looking all over the backboard, all different parts of the rim and so forth. The heat maps are very scattered as opposed to being very unified, and their success was less. If I take that then and compare it to on court performance, we see a difference as well. And we published that paper several years ago. So absolutely. And I showed it in there in basketball, been shown in golf. I'm showing it still with clubs in baseball, and we've had good success not only with batters. You think about, watching the ball, and there's a specific pattern that a batter will look at as they are facing a pitcher, as the pitcher winds up and delivers the ball. And if they don't have that pattern of fixation, they're not going to be as successful. But we've been working with pitchers, and we've actually done with some clubs with the pitchers. We've increased significantly their strike rate because of what they're looking at during their windup and delivery of the pitch. So on both sides of the field, if you will, this concept of what you're looking at during the active sport becomes critical.
Yeah, I mean, it crosses all sports, right? And many fields, I mean, even as a surgeon. And as a surgeon, I'm sure that it's different. Obviously, now we do a lot of arthroscopic and robotic surgery, and that also changes. But it's that concentration and fixation.
What you're looking at, your things are going to go to where you're looking. That's the bottom line. Whether it's throwing something or hitting something or trying to put a suture into, a small vessel, where you're looking is what's going to determine where your hands and what you're doing is going to go. It can be arthroscopically, it can be remotely. Where you're looking is the key.
Yeah, it sounds so basic, but it's actually hard to do that because our attention span isn't so strong all the time.
Yeah, your bones were bigger than my eye muscles that I operate on. Through a microscope, everything's about the same size, actually.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's hard, especially as a surgeon. I don't operate anymore. I'm 64 years old, so I don't operate anymore. The way medicine has changed, it's actually more beneficial financially to not operate, and it's less risky and less stressful. So I've done thousands of operations, strabismus operations. I had my fill of that. But there is a case, as a surgeon, it's not just a matter of paying attention to where you want to put the suture. You need to pay attention to lots of things at the same time. And there was an unfortunate story where somebody in the operating room had their music up too high, because often there's background music you put on, and they weren't listening to the EKG, the cardiac monitor, beep, beep, beep. And they pulled on the muscle, and they got an octocardiac reflex that reduced the heart rate to nothing. And they didn't realize that, and they kept pulling, and it was nothing. And the person either passed away or had significant damage. Obviously, it was a malpractice suit. I had as a fellow, I had a case where I pulled on the muscle, the heart stopped. I let go of the muscle, waited a second or two, it didn't come back, and actually, started chest compressions for 15 seconds until the heart rate came back. And I don't remember if we actually finished the surgery or not at that point. I don't remember, but basically the guy, I remember this specifically. The guy, wakes up and you're talking to him at post-op. Obviously, I had to tell him, what's going on. He says, Doc, you told me you're doing eye surgery, but my chest hurts. Why is that? I was like, well, let me tell you the story. I had to do a little bit of pressing over here. He was fine. He had very, very few seconds of heart wasn't beating, so nothing happened to him, and obviously he was ventilated. But that was, as a fellow, that was a scary moment to have that happen. And this other case I mentioned was an unfortunate thing. But surgeons have to concentrate on lots of things in addition to their vision to perform well. So, you know, elite athletes' work is hard. I'm not going to say a surgeon's work is not equally hard.
It's all variable. Lots of things moving moving around. So how has technology from stroboscopic glasses to eye tracking and virtual reality really changed the way you measure as well as improve visual performance?
Well, I remember back when we first started. I'm not sure if people remember what EPROMs are. Do you know what an EPROM is? Let's see. That's how old I am. I shaved my head so you can't see the gray hair, but
Like you're not much older than me, but okay.
EPROMs are little chips, computer chips with lots of wires, not wires, but little posts, if you will, that you have to put into integrated circuit boards, and they have memory and they program. And you can change what a system does by changing this EPROM chip. I'm not sure they even have them anymore. They were a real pain because if you don't get it in right, the little leg would bend, and if the leg bent and broke, then the chip was worthless. Or if it got stuck inside the board, you couldn't use the board anymore. A whole big deal. We started vision testing using boards, the EEPROM chips systems. We found that 2020 vision was too easy for these guys. I told the average is 2012. We tried doubling, the distance of the machine so that 2020 was really now 2010, right? Because you put something twice as far away, it gets smaller. And we found that we had to have specific programs to be able to do all that, and we had to change these chips with the EEPROM chips. Major hassle. Off the shelf systems. We've now gotten to the point where we use testing on iPads. And we have software, obviously, that produces what we need. We learned that just a regular eye chart type of test does not at all simulate what an athlete needs in terms of vision. We created our own test, and we got actually, our own test in conjunction, supported by a major pharma company, if you've heard of them. They were bought by Novartis. They're spun off, but they put in $5 million to develop the system. We both jointly own the system. They use it in developing products in their business, and we use it in sports and military and education and driving and so forth. But that system is much more replicative of what an athlete needs, or frankly, a driver who's driving a car needs in terms of vision testing. We show small targets similar to the eye chart. That's fine. But our targets, instead of being black and white, high contrast, are lower contrast, are gray on white. Because if you're driving, for example, on a rainy day in Northern Virginia that's foggy in the springtime, we'll say, if you have to you're in a place you don't know, and you don't have your GPS now that says, in 100 feet, turn right, you're trying to read a street sign. When it's foggy and rainy, that's low contrast. It's hard to see that. When you're trying to pick up the spin of a baseball, that's low contrast. It's a red seam on a white ball. In fact, it's someone's fingers on those seams on the ball, which is what you want to pick up. And that's all not black and white. That's low contrast. And so we want to test small targets, low contrast, and the eye chart, regular eye chart. You can stare at that chart for 30 seconds and come up with an answer and change your answer 5 times. And if you get it right, you get credit. Our test, we show this small faint target for a very short time, 300 milliseconds, 100 milliseconds. And that's all you get to see. Boom, finish. That's it. You have to say what it is after that. You can wait as long as you want, but you're not going to see anymore. It's a blank screen. And that's what you have to do to hit a baseball. As I mentioned, you only have 100 milliseconds to view the baseball before you have to decide. In hockey, in football, in almost every sport, there's a time component. You don't have the luxury of waiting. And we want to test that way. And when we do that and we correlate that to on-field performance, we see correlations. We see differences in ability based on that test. Obviously, that drives us into intervention and treatment. Whereas the eye chart, regular eye chart, doesn't translate into any on-field performance metric. And so someone doesn't see well, great, you can fix that, but you really haven't addressed how they're going to perform in the sport, which is the ultimate answer. We want to help people perform better. So it's changed a lot from EEPROM chips to iPad specific programs.
So is there any breakthrough that really excites you at this time? All these things you said, all these testing tools, and is there
Oh,
anything that you're looking
that
forward to in the future or anything that is currently
yeah, there's a lot of stuff.
available?
As the years have passed, my understanding obviously has developed. That's what I tried to put together in the book. My understanding has really evolved, and I think that that's normal. That should happen. You learn, and then you learn new things, and you apply new things. You think of new things. I've moved from the eyes to me. The eyeballs themselves are very important, but they are the smaller piece in the bigger part about vision. The eye sees and the brain, well, some people use these terms differently, but the eye has vision and the brain sees, or vice versa. But the point is that the eye is just the camera, and the information goes to the brain. It's processed in many different parts of the brain, obviously. It's probably vision is processed in more areas of the brain than any other thing that we do. It seeps into everything. And there are different pathways for vision to go to the brain. People think about the eyes, then go to the back part of the brain, which is the vision cortex, then information goes forward. It gets, thought about. There's an action, a motor action. There's a detection section, and those work together to then make a decision and so forth. That's very gross. But there are people. There's something called blind sight, and this is fascinating. Blind sight is this ability for people that are blind, that cannot see, to still detect motion. In other words, they can't see, but they can tell you, yeah, there's something moving up on the side here. Well, how do they do that if they're blind? Well, they do that because the fibers from the eye separate in midway in their path, and going into a part that goes to the vision part of the brain, the back part of the brain. Other parts go into more basic parts of the brain, and those are motion fibers. And so even if the back part of the brain isn't working from a stroke, for example, or whatever, those other fibers are still working in other parts of the brain to detect emotion and so forth. To me, the frontier is going to be in how can we get the brain to use the information coming from the eyes more efficiently to have better performance. And that's the area that's interesting. And whether that's coming from transcranial stimulation, with a magnet, or electrical stimulation, is interesting. Whether there's optical methods you can train through seeing to make those parts of the brain work better. That idea of neuroplasticity to change how the brain functions is kind of what turns me on at this point. And even in the retina, the retina has a lot of processing of information there. How can we optimize that? Are there tints that we can use to stimulate other parts of those fibers to work more efficiently? These are all the areas to me that are interesting. And looking at, how many new papers they get, all these Google searches, they give me papers and stuff. Something interesting. I watch podcasts and I record on my watch here. When I'm watching a podcast, something to remember to look into later.
Yeah.
All these different things trying to put together. Well, I'm not going to say because it's an idea that I think is a really good idea that I hopefully going to be able to grow, but even into many other fields that are totally unrelated to vision, eye care, or even sports. Incorporate that into sports vision, to me, is how we can move things forward. And there's a specific area that I think um, can be used in that. It will, I think, make performance, specifically in baseball, much better.
So fascinating. Do you see any measurable changes in visual tracking or reaction time when an athlete is fatigued, sleep deprived, or stressed?
Yeah, as I mentioned, the brain is really the key here, and all of those things are going to affect the brain's function. Right? Football, soccer teams in the UK will kind of quarantine players. They kind of make them. We get the hotel, they have to kind of be in the rooms, kind of off devices to get a good sleep and so forth. Other sports, are not quite as strict about those things. There's no question. Diet's going to make a difference. Sleep's going to make a difference. Alertness can make a difference. Why do clubs that travel cross country not perform as well as clubs that are at home? Clearly, because you got 3 hour time change. It's going to make a difference. You go to London to play football. It's going to be a terrible game. The NFL just played the game there. It's not going to be a great game because these people are completely out of their element in terms of what they're used to being in. Their diet timing is going to be different. It takes time. It takes a while for the GI system and even for the sleep system to get to a normal time zone. I lived abroad for 7 years, and when I flew back and forth, I flew to Hong Kong to give a lecture, and I went there and flew back. And so my body did nothing. I basically was on East Coast time the whole time. When I went abroad, like other times, it would take probably a week or 10 days before I felt like, okay, I'm kind of normal, right? You can't fly to London 2 days in advance or fly to Tokyo to play an exhibition game, in the beginning of the season in baseball, and be there 2, 3 days, think you're ready to play the best game you can play. It's not going to happen. You need to be there for probably 10 or 14 days before you're going to be at a point where you're going to really perform at your best because of all those changes in the body that happen. So if that happens in time zones, it's certainly going to happen if someone doesn't take care of themselves properly in terms of sleep, in terms of nutrition, and so forth.
There is so much focus now on recovery, and I actually did a podcast last week with a Whoop band, and the same thing. And how does recovery influence readiness? And so it's interesting. It affects so many different aspects as we talk about.
Yeah, just myself. In the morning, I'm fairly sharp. I get a lot done. As the day goes on, if I'm a day doing work on my desk, research, computer, writing, and so forth, it gets to be 6 o'clock. What I know would take me about a minute in the morning takes me about 5 or 10 minutes at 6 o'clock. It just not doesn't work. It doesn't flow. I don't know how people you have most baseball games are at night. That is harder. I think you report to the field at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. That's great, but these guys aren't getting up at noon. They're getting up at 9 or 10. Probably a lot of them have families, have young kids. They're getting up. They're spending time with their kids, with their families. They come by the time they get to the game at 7:30, 7:10, whatever. They're not. No way they can be as sharp as they would be if the game was at 10 a.m., for example.
Yeah, no, it's very true. I mean, I think that being a night, a night owl or whatever, early bird. I'm certainly an early bird in my household, and I always laugh. I've always been that way. I've always been much more productive in the morning, but as you get older, also that changes, and you get more fatigued.
Yeah, I'm up at 5:30, 6. Well, let's say six every day.
So, at what age should a young athlete start developing their visual skills? You probably, with all this competitiveness, you probably get asked that a lot.
Yeah, yeah. You if you talk about the bottom of the pyramid, the sharpness of vision, that can change. You can get a prescription. You can have a focusing problem up until about 20 to 25 years old, 22 years old or so. Your numbers still change. And that's important because when you have these players who are minor league players, they're coming out of high school, they're coming out of college, they're still in the age where their prescriptions change. I can give you an example. We had a player, most of the clubs I worked for many years, 18 years at Dodgers. It's been 20 plus years at the Red Sox, for example. Most of these clubs are many, many years. And we look at players over time. And if you look at their performance, you look at their vision functions, you can see in the years where the performance goes down, their vision numbers are down. And so we're very tight on not allowing an athlete to lose anything. Even if they were 2012, they go down to 2020. That's terrible. We need to do a lot of work. If they're 2015, it's a little more, depends on other factors. And so we had this one player. I remember the story when I was starting with the Red Sox. The first meeting I had in Fenway Park with the team, the front office, Theo Epstein was there. I'm making my presentation based on the Dodger work I had done. And I showed them this Dodger player who I showed performance and vision. And there was a change, and we intervened, and the vision went up, and the performance went up, and the whole kind of what you expect. And I was totally blown away by Theo Epstein looking at that and telling me who the player was. That to me really taught me about Theo and about these guys who are in the front office. They're extremely sharp. To know by looking at someone's performance numbers over a period of time who that player is means you have to know every player's performance numbers for that period of time. And we're talking a lot of numbers here. And you have to know them well enough that you can not look them up, but spit back at what that is. So that's just a side a little bit, just incredible. The performance over time changes. So then when you have a kid who's young and you check them, they should be checked. A teenager, we're talking about sports vision, not health, but sports vision. A teenager is interested, a young teenager is interested in really pursuing sports and spending a lot of time. Their family's paying for, travel teams and so forth. Need to have a sports vision exam and need to do that every year because they're in a prime time that their numbers are going to change. And if they get quarter, half a number nearsighted in one eye and they still feel like they see good because the other eye is great and they can do well in school and nothing else is noticed by anybody, it's going to affect their game because one eye not being that bad, not being 2015, we'll say, is going to be a problem. So they need to be checked yearly. That's why the pros, we check them yearly through the entire contract. And not just the vision, but all the different pieces. So absolutely, start young and be consistent throughout.
So is there any vision training that you recommend for a young athlete? We have, again, all these coaches and parents, and they're so competitive and playing year-round baseball and always looking to improve their game. Is there something that they can focus on that you'd recommend?
So it comes down
Right.
to specifically what the person has, right? So if they come in and they're, especially if they don't feel like they're playing well, but even if they feel like they're playing well and they check their, let's say, hand-eye coordination and it's slow, or a complex reaction time is slow, then we want to train that. We want to work on that to bring that up at least to a level that's commensurate with their age. Ideally, I track the MLB level of performance. Isn't that over the years with the thousands of players, we have kind of good idea of what we want for each of these tests at each person. And I think that's one of the things why clubs like to work with me is because I have this database of knowledge of what successful teams. There's nobody alive who has won more than uh, 8 world championships, 8 World Series championships that I've won. There's no one alive who has more. It's not because I'm a magic person who comes into a club and makes you win a World Series. It's because the club has a mindset. They want to optimize all these different areas, and I'm one of the cogs in the wheel that does that, and they're successful. And you can be successful without me. And the 2 clubs in the World Series, although I've taken care of both of those clubs in the World Series, I don't currently take care of them. Maybe we started the building something, I don't know. But the importance of having somebody who knows what the targets are is important. And so when you have a young kid who you're evaluating, if there's an area that doesn't meet target, you want to train that. You want to correct that. Glasses or contacts isn't training, it's correction. But hand-eye coordination reaction time training would be training. And if you have someone who's really good everywhere, I tell them, you know what, your visual system is working fine. Why don't you work on something and get a trainer in your batting swing or something, that's gonna maybe be more valuable for you. That's what I tell them because not everybody needs me to train them. That's an important concept. Like I said, we don't train everybody.
Yeah, so it's a customized approach. It sounds like it's not one size fits all. It's not everyone needs to work on this one specific thing, as you said. It's
Absolutely.
identifying where the deficiencies are.
Absolutely. That to me is the most efficient, most productive, most correct way of applying our knowledge in sports vision to help someone perform better. Just like you apply that knowledge in your care of your patients.
And and vision training isn't really just about elite athletes. I mean, that's who you work with mostly, but can vision training or vision optimization help active people, just a runner, a cyclist, weekend warrior to better improve their coordination, reaction, injury prevention, or as we get older, our
Yep.
balance?
Absolutely. I'll give you another paper that I wrote, a case report of a patient who has this condition. She's publicly talked about it. Her name is Rebecca Alexander. I don't know if you've heard of her. She has a condition where it's like retinitis pigmentosa. So she progressively loses vision, but she also loses hearing. And so she basically loses both vision and hearing. So if you think about your senses, vision and hearing are really hard to not have, especially when you grew up having them. And this is what happens in this condition. So she lives here in Manhattan in New York City, and we got connected through different ways, but was noticing when she crossing the street, she was getting nearly hit by taxi cabs who were turning into the street she was crossing. Nowadays, it's even worse because on the bike lanes and the bicycles are zooming all over the place, and it's even worse. In fact, she just posted a video that she got hit last week, I think, but nothing serious, some cuts and scrapes, but she got hit. So she came, we talked about it and said, you know what? I can't restore your vision. You have a retinal disease that damages your retina. I can't bring that retina back. What I can do, though, is make you more sensitive or aware or allow you to react faster to what the retina you do have is seeing so that you have a chance to stop or get out of the way and not get hit. And so we trained that. I trained her basic reaction time in the periphery. And what she noticed was that she was able to avoid, until this bicycles and so forth, avoid getting hit as much because she was able to sense the object in the periphery moving towards her and react to it faster. And so, we moved from elite athletes who have this visual system that's finely tuned, that's incredibly sharp, to somebody who is legally blind, who wears, cochlear implant hearing aids to try to hear, to use the same techniques to improve both of their performance in these very different tasks.
Yeah, it's not about just training the elite, right? It's about the every day and how you can help everyone.
I have lots of ideas, unfortunately. Well, that's fortunate, but unfortunately, I'm not really good at business part of it. And so one of the things I think that if an insurance company was smart, a driving car insurance company was smart, they would come to me and say, you know what can you do? What can we do for my insurees, I guess, or whatever they call them, to avoid having accidents? Because we'll make much more money if we don't have to pay out anything, but people pay premiums, we'll make more money.
Yeah.
And I'll go to them and I'll say, well, there's a lot we can do. I can make drivers have much faster reactions. have much better vision, avoid collisions, move out just like an NFL player or an athlete will be able to do something to avoid a collision that will lead to concussion. I can avoid a driver having an accident. I can't avoid every accident, but I can reduce the number because people can anticipate, decide earlier, and react faster. Unfortunately, I don't know how to. I tried getting insurance companies to talk to me. They didn't get very far. So if anyone on your podcast is an insurance person, here is a way that you can become the star of the company by getting this going.
It's a great business proposition. I like the idea. I mean, actually, the cover has a lot of aspects, a lot of insurance companies.
Even, they use simulators. You don't need a simulator. You need these people to react faster. But even, we just in esports work in that area because that's important. It's very hard to walk around with your eyes closed, to do anything with your eyes closed. And if we can make what you see more efficient in your day-to-day life, you're ahead of the game.
So what inspired your book, your Eye of the Champion?
Well, that's a good question.
And show it to us. Yeah, show
It
us
was
the
it
book.
was it was, a fair amount of work. It's actually my second book. My first book was a dictionary of ophthalmology that I wrote with a colleague. That was actually harder. To define precisely into a couple seconds hundreds of terms was not easy, but that kinda started the fire to write books, and I'm somebody who, maybe it's a curse instead of a benefit, likes to accomplish things. I like to do something, achieve it, and then move on to another thing to achieve. I've run 3 marathons, 2 triathlons, did one. I still want to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. I haven't done that yet. But writing a sports vision book was one of those things. I wanted to kind of take what I've learned in 30 years and be able to make it popular, we'll call it, something that could be readable by anybody. I didn't want to write a book for medical doctors. I didn't want to write a book for eye care providers. I wanted to write a book for athletes, parents of athletes, and people who would understand, but I didn't want to make it a simple, stupid book. I wanted to have enough science in there and fact in there and references to published papers that what we talk about in terms that can be understood by someone who doesn't have a medical degree, but could then leverage that information to help their performance. And that's sort of the reason I wrote that. Maybe it's a little bit of a legacy. After I'm gone, the book will still be there. Maybe that's important. And then on the other front, I wanted people to know what I'm doing. And one of the best ways for people to know what you're doing is to write a book about it or write about it. The YouTube channel. Last I looked, about 16,000 subscribers on the YouTube channel. I try to put out a weekly newsletter, which is writing as well. So all of that is intended, like the book, to bring this information into right to the lap of the people that it can help the most, which is going to be the athletes or parents of athletes or sniffing to others athletes or whoever is interested in helping an athlete.
That's really inspiring, and you're going right to the heart, and right to where to where it matters. So, okay, I have one final question. So, if you could leave athletes at any level with one takeaway about vision and performance, what would it be?
Well, to be as all encompassing as possible, it would be get a sports vision exam. I actually did a YouTube about that as well. Even if you think you see well, if you think you're performing well, if you think you don't have vision can't do anything to make you perform better, you're wrong. And the only way you're going to learn is to have a good sports vision exam. Problem is to find a sports vision specialist who's going to do that properly for you. They're different. Coming to see me in Manhattan is certainly a possibility, but it's going to cost you a buck. I have a limited amount of time and it's pretty busy. You don't have to come to see me. There are lots of people that can do an equally good job, I think, but you have to do a little bit of homework to find them and you have to travel a little bit. I've had people come from abroad, people come across the country, and that's fine. I had someone from Manhattan yesterday. It varies quite a bit, and that's all perfectly fine. But just like when people ask me, who do I go for my LASIK surgery? Well, first of all, if you're an athlete, don't do LASIK surgery, but or at least if you're a small target, fast moving athlete, don't do LASIK surgery. Certainly not baseball player. Another paper we published about that, by the way. But I send people to a specific doctor I think they need to have it done in Nashville, Tennessee, because from my experience and from my reading and from my knowledge, he's going to have the best chance to have the result we want to have to help you in your performance in your sport and not take you back. There's many, many cases of people who have laser surgery and have had bad sports experience. Brian McCann, for example, was a catcher for the Atlanta Braves a few years back, had the surgery, had to have 2 or 3 surgeries, was in the minor leagues, rehab for quite a bit. His career was never the same. And so there's lots of people, and I can say his name because it's all public. Lots of people like that. So like I sent people there, you want to do your homework to go to the right person in the country to have the right sports vision exam. But that's going to be the number one thing that you can do. I say before that is research, right? Is to get on the internet, be skeptical of sometimes what you read on the internet, make sure it's coming from a source that's going to be a credible source. look at other places to make sure it's corroborated and so forth. I use ChatGPT to write sometimes, and I get some back, and it gives me something that's really funny. I say, show me the reference, and it comes back and says, well, I didn't really have reference.
Right.
It's
So
okay.
true.
So you want to make sure what you're reading is accurate. But if you do the research, find the person to go to, and you're going to help yourself.
That's great input. And if people want to get more information, can they go to, do you have a website? Do you have YouTube channel? Can you tell them how to access that?
Yeah. The best entree point is probably through the website, www. Pretty simple, Sports Vision, all one word, .nyc, New York City, because that's where I'm at. So www.sportsvision.nyc. And from there, there's a contact form if you want to ask me a question. There's a link to the book. I have, you can buy the book on Amazon, but what I have on the website, because Amazon takes a cut, so I can make a better deal on my website. I have a bundle where we have the book, audiobook, that you can get from Audible. You can pay for that too, but it's a bundle with the PDF of the book. So you have a kind of a print copy, you have the PDF computer copy, or you can load it up to Kindle and so forth, and you have the audiobook all together for basically the price you would buy for the book on Amazon. You should try to sign up for the newsletter, because every week I put out a newsletter about Sports Vision. This week's newsletter, in fact, 6 less than $50 devices that can help your sports vision progress. The total, if you add them all up, is about 200. Because each one is a lot less. Only one of them is $49.99. The rest of them are a lot less. And all the way down to the cheapest is getting tennis balls to work on your peripheral vision using tennis balls, and that's going to cost you about $9 on Amazon to get the tennis balls. So the newsletter's on there, the blog is on there, everything is on there. So that's a good entry point.
All right. Well, that's a great resource of information for our listeners. Dr. Laby, thank you so much for helping us see the game differently and reminding us that sometimes the smallest details can really change everything. Thanks again for listening. I'm Dr. Robin West. Join me next time as we dive deeper into the science of performance, recovery, and injury prevention. This has been Blueprint of an Athlete, where science meets sports.